Well, it's time for this week's Legal Lowdown with Attwood Marshall Lawyers. We often hear that people stay in relationships maybe for the sake of the children, but increasingly many Australians are staying because they simply don't believe they can afford to leave. With housing costs soaring, the cost of living continuing to rise, and fears about legal fees and retirement savings, separation can feel financially impossible, particularly for people later in life who have spent decades building a life together. So are people becoming trapped in unhappy relationships because of money? And if you think you can't afford to separate, what options do you have? What are there available to you? To help answer those questions, we're joined by family lawyer and partner Hayley Condon from Attwood Marshall Lawyers. Good afternoon to you, Hayley.
Good afternoon to you, Carla, and to your listeners.
All right, Hayley, very quickly, are you finding in your day-to-day business that you're finding more people delaying separation simply because they don't think they can afford it?
I am, Carla. The cost of living pressures are definitely affecting separation decisions. Many people are not staying because the relationship is working. They are staying because they are worried about the price of separation and the flow-on consequences of that decision.
And then you sort of hear horror stories about separation costing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is that the reality for everyone? Is that another thing that people are sort of considering?
No, Carla, that is not the reality for every separating couple. I think it's important to mention here that just because a couple decide to separate, it does not mean that they will be litigating their matter before the court and spending those large amount of money that you've just been speaking about. The cost really depends upon three factors: the complexity of the matter and the issues to be resolved, the level of conflict between the parties, and how willing both parties are to exchange information and negotiate a resolution. Because, Carla, this might be surprising, but most family law matters resolve by agreement, either through negotiation or mediation, without a final court hearing. But the direction of a matter ultimately comes down to the parties themselves.
Because it is one of those things. There's a report out all the time that, says that the percentage of Australians that stay in relationships, around because of kids, and they end up staying under the same roof with an ex-partner, and without separating or divorcing or go elsewhere because of the cost of living also making independent housing way too expensive. It's like close to 50% or something. I think the last time I read it was like 42% of Aussies stay together in a relationship despite the fact that they're desperately unhappy or whatever because it's too expensive to walk away. Is that common? I just can't afford to leave. Is that a common concern that people raise with you?
It is, Carla, exactly for the reasons that you've mentioned. Short term, people are worried about, well, where will I live? Can I afford rent or the mortgage? How will I pay for the children? Will I actually have access to money in the short term? Then there's those longer term considerations. People worry about whether their property settlement will be sufficient to re-establish themselves. Will I be able to buy a new home, retain the current family home? Will I have enough financial security to live comfortably after separation? But this is where legal advice, obtaining that early, can often help people work through those concerns. It helps them weigh up whether they want to separate, and if they do, to plan the steps involved.
That's based on the idea that things are amicable and that it can happen. I think Queenslanders are the most likely to remain living under the same roof after separation. Like I said, I think it's closer to 50%. It's 48.1%. And of those people, they say that financial difficulties is the biggest reason. Because, if you don't have unlimited funds, there are ways that you can resolve matters that are less expensive, that doesn't require a lengthy court battle, but it does require both parties to be, I guess, reasonable.
That is exactly right, Carla. If you want to avoid the litigation pathway, then you do have to bring some reasonableness to the table and try and put that emotion to one side. But look, parties can negotiate directly with each other. They can negotiate through solicitors. They can attend mediation, or for parenting arrangements, they can participate in what's called family dispute resolution. If they approach it in this fashion, then the costs they're going to incur will ultimately be considerably different compared to acrimonious litigation through the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia.
It is a lengthy and heart-aching process for everyone involved. Been an adult child of divorce several times with my dad, and it is, you know, if it's done acrimoniously, it's horrible. It has a lasting effect, and it's not just a financial one. If anyone has questions for Hayley as well, if you want to ring in anonymously, that's totally fine. 1338 882, that's the open line, or you can text through if you've got a question. Hayley's completely open to answering any queries that you might have. If this is something that you are going through at the moment, because separation, it can be, you know, emotional, and the financial strain is huge. But there are ways we can work around this, isn't there, Hayley? The text line 0499 880 882. Because many people don't realise, I guess, Hayley, that there are now funding solutions designed for, in particular, for family law matters. Can you explain how these work and how they might help?
Certainly. There are family law funding products, available in Australia now. An example of that is Just Fund. These are generally designed for people who have a property settlement entitlement, but they cannot access funds at the beginning of their matter. So in simple terms, the funding generally covers legal fees and sometimes covers living expenses for a party up to an approved amount. Repayment is normally made from the final property settlement, such as your cash settlement sum or sale proceeds from a property. These products aren't suitable for everyone and usually involve eligibility criteria, as you can expect. However, they can provide a practical option for someone to retain legal representation, especially where that person has no real access to funds initially.
Yeah. I spoke with the CEO and co-founder of Just Fund, Jack O'Donnell, probably about this time last year, actually. And it's an incredible business that he set up there. You know, he identified clients. 64% of clients identified as survivors of domestic or financial abuse, and they were trapped in these relationships and they couldn't leave, but because they couldn't access funds, they couldn't afford the legal help that they needed to leave the situation. And traditional banks don't lend, and legal aid isn't always available. And this is incredible to hear how, you know, he's a legal background, same thing. He decided that something needed to change in the system. And to be able to access what they knew eventually you could get access to if there was a sale of the home or whatever, like you were saying, Hayley, and you can access those funds, and they take that risk on board to be able to help fund your case to get through, because they know at the end of the day they're going to get paid. It's an amazing idea, and the reason why it came about, I think it helps people out of situations, particularly when you think of domestic violence situations or people who have been in financially abusive situations, to be able to get out and get clear air.
Absolutely. It gives them that opportunity to obtain the legal representation that they want and to assist them get out of those unsafe and dangerous situations, and allows them to secure a settlement to be able to move on and provide for their own financial future and that for their children.
Because, you know, there is a point where delaying separation can actually create bigger problems down the track for people.
Absolutely, Carla. Delay can sometimes make matters so much harder to resolve.
Yeah.
For example, financial records may become more difficult to obtain.
Yeah.
Assets can be sold. Debts can increase. Businesses can change. Informal arrangements can become entrenched. But I think it's also important that I mention here that there are also time limits that apply in family law matters, and people really need to keep those in mind. So for married couples, property and or spousal maintenance proceedings generally need to be commenced within 12 months after a divorce becomes final. For de facto couples, that general time limit is 2 years from the date of separation.
I guess for someone who's listening right now, Hayley, I guess Hayley Condon from Attwood Marshall Lawyers, for someone who's listening now who may feel trapped because it might be a financial situation, the money is an issue, what's the first step that they should take?
The first step, Carla, is not to feel overwhelmed, as stressful as this can be, but to get informed and organised by booking an appointment with a family law lawyer for early advice. A lawyer can help identify what steps should be taken, what documents are needed, and what interim issues may need to be addressed with the other party. So obtaining early advice can make a real difference to your experience, the pathway your matter takes, but also how cost-effectively and quickly the matter can be resolved.
Hayley Condon, I really appreciate you joining us every time. Family lawyer and partner from Attwood Marshall Lawyers. You have a great afternoon and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thank you, Carla. Absolute pleasure as always.